2, 3, 4.
I was born in Alabama, but I grew up in northeastern Ohio, a steel mill town. My father, like a lot of other people in that black community, came from the South. We were very poor, but like other poor people I've talked to, we made our own fun. You know, we found a way to have a good time at play. And the school system I was in elementary school, all the teachers could play the piano. There was a piano in every classroom. One day when I was in the first grade, I was helping the teacher. I was a shameless teacher's pet. And I was helping her clean out her closet, and I found a record. A record. And I couldn't believe it, because records are Louis Jordan and stuff like that, right? And I didn't think white people listened to records. And this particular record, I knew it had to be some bad blues belting, because it said on there, Madam Butterfly. I could picture Madam Butterfly weighing about 300 pounds, you know, and had feathers in her hair and everything, and singing something like, I got the world in a jug and the stopper in my hand. You know, I said, all right. I said, Madam Butterfly, is she good? She said, yeah, Madam Butterfly is wonderful. And she looked at it and she said, you know, I had lost this. I lost it here in the closet somehow, and I bought another one. Would you like to have this one? I was like, yeah. Because see, at home we had all those beautiful records, but we weren't allowed to touch the record player. So I said, yeah, sure. Because that gave me a little clout, a little political clout. I got my own record, right? So I took it home and I went straight to the record player and put it on. It was Un Bel Dì, you know, naturally. And I'm looking at that and listening to it, and other members of the family are coming in the room, and somebody said, what is that? Because that sounds like screaming if you don't know what's going on. I said, I don't know. I thought it was a record. That ain't no record. You know, it's like, no, that's like, I don't know what that is. But then I remembered that for the children's programming on Saturday morning that I listened to on the radio, which was always either fun or informative or something like that, that right after it finished, some music like that started. That was when the Met was first doing their Saturday matinee concerts. I already knew that there was such a thing as, you know, us listening to certain music and white people listening to other music. Because, you know, there was always Perry Como and and sort of their stuff, you know. Now, it was a blessing that a town like that had enough money coming in, mostly from the football team, to have a well-equipped band room in the junior highs and the high school. When I found a baritone sax in the band room one day, I didn't know what it was. It was all twisted up and everything. It wasn't like saxophone. I didn't think it was a saxophone at all. Most of the parts for the baritone sax in a concert band are like tuba parts. I noticed something similar to the right-hand fingering of the tuba. Whenever there was a note coming up that I didn't know the fingering, I'd stop and look at the tubas and learn that one. We weren't allowed to play or even touch other people's school-owned instruments. So I wait till the band director's out of the room. I go and pick up the tuba. and I played a chromatic scale. I was about to do something else, and I looked up, the band director had come back into the room and caught me. I was trapped. How long have you been playing the tuba? And I thought, oh man, he's got me dead to rights for today, and he's trying to get me for something I didn't even do. He said, no, so what I want to know is, how did you know what to play? I said, well, I watched the tuba players and I learned the fingering. He said, yeah, but how did you learn to get a tone? I said, I don't know, do I have a tone? And he had me play a little part, a tuba part from some march, you know, bum, 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 you know, no big challenge, you know. And at a certain point, he slammed his hand down on the desk and said, who's been teaching you how to play the tuba? Tell me right now. Really, and I went, I'm 13, right? Well, you know, it's just hard to believe that anybody could play that well in one day. I said, well, I did it, but I ain't doing it no more. I don't know, the irony of that still gets me. I was stationed in Boston in the Navy. A woman who lived two doors away in Ohio was living in Boston. My mother was friendly with her mother. And when I called, she said, are you still interested in jazz? I said, I'm more committed now than ever. She said, well, you got to meet my friend's son, Tony Williams. He's 14 years old, and he's a jazz drummer. The first thing I really noticed about him was that he was much less of a kid than me and more of a cool cat. And so I was saying, you know, what I do and what I intend to do. And he's like, yeah, I'd like to hear you play sometime, you know. I went one night to see the Coltrane Quartet, and it turned out to be a quintet because Eric Dolphy was there. And he had just, 2 days before, had just met this friend of mine in Boston. I spoke to him and I talked about my dreams, my aspirations. I want to come to New York and do such and such in a couple of years. And he was very interested in me talking about the tuba. And he asked me about it, asked about the problems he thought tuba players had. And, you know, that they played behind the time, they didn't swing, and they didn't open themselves enough to really become jazz musicians. I said, really? What about X and Y, you know? And he said, they ain't having it. He said, I wouldn't wait 2 years in Chicago if you can do half of what you say you can do, and I don't know what that is. He said, you're needed. I was like, whoa. So I said, yeah, it's February now. Maybe I could leave like in August or something. And 5 days later, I caught the bus to New York. I did the Andrew Hill record. I did the stuff with Gil. I did the Tender Moments, McCoy Tyner. And did the Genuine Tong Funeral with Carla Bley and Gary Burton. High Blues Pressure with Freddie Hubbard. I mean, it was just, and I knew I wouldn't keep doing that many and that good of records. In both cases with those records, I had asked if I could have a solo, one solo, you know. And both the leaders said, hey, yeah, that would be a good idea. And Lee Morgan said, no, he can't do it. You know, I wasn't senior enough. Lee made such a fuss about it. It was so intense about it that I didn't even want to follow through, you know. But I was pissed off at Lee Morgan. I was, you know, giving him the evil eye for sure. And then at Tender Moments, the very same thing happened. McCoy was gonna give me a solo, and I still hadn't made it well enough, you know, for Lee Morgan. But I kind of cornered him in Rudy's bathroom. Said, how much dope do I have to shoot up And for you to think I've paid enough dues to be on a record that you're playing on that's not even your date. Oh man, you don't have to make a federal case out of it. Yes, I do. I said, you don't even know how I play. I might blow you down. And I even think today it would have made a difference in my career if I'd established myself as a player on those dates. Miles recorded in early 1968 a thing called Falling Water. That was the first time Miles did the big band concept with his band. The harpist was straight out of classical and had no idea much of what was going on except that she played what was written. Miles got, she got his attention and he said, "Why you play the time so stiff?" She said, "Well, I'm playing according to the way I've been taught, you know." He said, "Don't you know nothing about jazz at all? About the phrasing?" And he said, "Didn't you ever have no other music in your house but classical?" She said, "No." He said, "Well, you didn't have a maid or no shit?" She said, "No, we didn't have a maid." I mean, she answered it like it was a real question. I started getting a reputation in pop circles and other circles in jazz and the usual studio thing. In 1975, I did some stuff for Joe Boyd and Lenny Waronker. At one point, Joe Boyd met Lorne Michaels in LA at a party, and he was talking about, since his guy, Howard Shore, didn't know New York musicians, he had to get a contractor for the band. That turned out to be for Saturday Night Live. I was there for 5 years, what I call the good years. When we started, they were unknown. We were much better known than they were. You know, you talk about liner notes. We're in everybody's record collection at that time, you know. I could find myself in almost anybody's record collection, even if it was like Barbara Streisand or something, you know. In the last couple of years, the Coke thing was pretty heavy nationwide, you know. And just a few of those people escaped that. 1974 was really a big year, a very active year. At the beginning of the year and the end of it, I was touring with Gato Barbieri playing the bass. I did a European tour, a long one with Gil Evans. And we also did the Jimi Hendrix. Gil Evans plays Jimi Hendrix. Near the end of the year, I got a call from Steve Medeo. He was called to get some guys to do a horn section with Lennon, with John Lennon. I went to the session and John was in a very good mood, and he said that he had the belief that horn players were more real musicians than most guys in most rock bands who were just guitar players or something. They would try this or that and nothing was working at all. And I was trying to keep quiet, but finally I said, listen, we'd been there over 3 hours. We'd been there for what would have been a single session already. I said, at this point, I know the track pretty well, and I have some ideas that I'd like to contribute if nobody minds. You know, I was being very careful with this, because I've heard one of those guys tell somebody, "Oh, who made you the arranger?" So I didn't want to hear no stuff like that. I was going to walk. When I said it, if nobody minds, John said, "For God's sake, yes." We did that on a you play this, you play that basis. And it worked. It worked fine for that tune. He said, "Well, let's all come back tomorrow and you can do the same thing." I said, okay. So we did that. We came the next day and got one down pretty quickly and went right to another one. So we had 3. At that point, May Pang, who was there You know, it was a time when Yoko was in Hong Kong or somewhere. She provided me with a cassette of all the rest of the tunes that I could work on at home if I wanted to write them out in the traditional way. John Lennon was very pleased, and he said, you know, you're getting a arranging credit for this. I said, you know, I thought about that. I don't know if I should or not. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, this isn't the way I would have done this project, you know. Well, I would have worked more closely with you because the best stuff that I'm putting down came from stuff you were humming. He said, oh, I understand. And I said, and I would have had some different personality. He said, okay, I get it. And the other thing is that, you know, beef jerky, the one, I guess it's just the one instrumental. That's essentially a celebration of John's rhythm guitar playing. I mean, he and Jesse Ed Davis do play the melody, but then it's like, you know, so, and there's no melody at that point. So what I put on the horns in there is my original shit, right? So afterwards, he said, it's amazing how you filled in all those gaps. I said, well, John, you know, I think that makes me co-author now that I've heard it and how it fits. I think that makes me co-author, you know. And he did about 15 seconds of freaking out. He said, oh man, it was, you know, just going off the wall for a while, and May came out, and by that time he calmed down and said, hey, you know, you're right. He said, but you know, and all week he'd been telling us what he'd been going through with the government, with immigration, with a Canadian pot bust that he had recently, and all the stuff that was going on between him and the Beatles, you know. I mean, he says, I can promise you that if I put this tune in with your name on it, you will get exactly nothing. He said, there's so many people who think that anything I do is theirs, and those people are going to get to you. And he said, but we can make an agreement on this, you know, that when the time comes, your name does go on Beef Jerky as the co-author. But that won't be for a while. He said, but I'm sincere and I really mean it. And I said, okay, and he gave me his hand to shake. And somehow that meant quite a lot to me, an Englishman wants to seal it like that. So I said, okay, I'm cool. Well, I was altogether too cool, because when we went in to do Double Fantasy, and afterward, when I was going to put together a horn section for his tour band, I had a recording of two English guys, Gary Window and Ian something or other. And they had this way of playing with two tenor saxophones that were tuned very strangely to each other. That was a great sound. I thought John would like it. And they lived up in Woodstock, and I went and got a copy of it. I brought it down to play for John after Double Fantasy had come out. They were in the studio. So I called him in the studio and asked, should I bring it up? And he said, well, we're going to stop early tonight. Why don't you bring it tomorrow after 3 o'clock? I said, okay. But that was the night he got shot. I talked to him about 6 hours before he died. And I didn't think about the whole thing with Beef Jerky for months after that even, or about a month. It was in January. I suddenly realized, oh, I'm out of the picture. I have no legal standing. I do believe that Yoko would do the right thing by me. I didn't know the band that well. I didn't know, I'd heard some of their music, and I wasn't too sympathetic with the night they drove Old Dixie down. At the first rehearsal, Alan Toussaint had used a cassette player that had bad batteries in it. So he wrote all the arrangements in the wrong key. Of course, when we got to rehearsal, we discovered this right away. When the band was in G, we were in F sharp. We were supposed to open the next night. So Robbie said, well, we can have the parts recopied overnight, but for now, we'll just play it in the key that the horns are in. I was impressed. I mean, for a guitar player, it's just a little more than sliding down one fret. But that band has two keyboard players. Both of them were going to play in F sharp when they were used to playing it in G. I was like, yeah, these guys are musicians. I so appreciate Levon because it's very clear that the money he paid the horn player. Some people felt that we took it out of his pocket, But he said he wants the band to sound the way he wants it to sound. And he would not do stuff that we weren't part of, And there was a lot of possibilities that didn't happen because of that. He said, well, I don't want to go and play for anybody who doesn't want to pay my musicians, because that's how he looked at it. I don't know if he should have done it that way or not, But money we were paid was right on the border into decent. It wasn't a lot. You couldn't say it wasn't enough. It was right at decent. I was thinking of making a tuba choir like that, maybe with a euphonium on top. But as it turned out, all the people I called to play euphonium, none of them showed up at the rehearsals. And my parts were for 4 tubas and a separate lead. So I would play the lead that the euphonium should have played. And that sounded much better than the euphonium would have sounded. Bob Stewart wanted to be in this band, but I couldn't ask him to come up on Thursday from Philly. He said, oh, I don't mind, and then come right back the next day. I said, no, it's too much to ask. He said, well, do you mind if I just show up anyway? Well, I guess so, but it would make me feel a little weird that, Well, after about 4 weeks of no euphonium, I decided I would play that part and Bob would be the 4th tuba in the ensemble. Then we invited the rhythm section to join us. And that stuff was swinging. It was soulful. It was had a kind of classical edge to it because of that sound didn't exist in jazz. And it was just great. I mean, it was a very fulfilling kind of thing to do, because we knew nobody else was doing anything like that. And the next year, or the year after that, we went electric with the rhythm section. And that was before anybody used the term fusion. But we were doing that with Gravity. We even had a gig one night at the Fillmore, one of their new band nights. It was great. People didn't know whether they should support it or not. They go, is this okay? Yeah. And they'd get enthusiastic. By the time the set was finished, they were going nuts.